And it says we're live, so I will take that as given. Hello, everyone. It's late. Doing this a little later than normal. It's 8 p.m. Been trying to do this video all day, and by golly, I'm going to do it before the end of the day. I'll tell you what I've been thinking about. So, Donald Trump, now that he's in office, making good on some campaign promises, and he's throwing tariffs left and right, and the Canadians, the Mexicans, and I don't know who else, the Chinese, and probably the Europeans after that, and a bunch of other people. And people are warning that this is the sort of thing that kind of blows up the global economy. So that's not good, right? Doesn't sound good to me. Not gonna like that. It'll cause inflation. Inflation can cause bankruptcies. Bankruptcies and similar things can disrupt the financial sector, which leads to there's been a lot of fragility and brittleness in the financial sector since the 2007 2008 crash. So a lot of zombie banks and a lot of zombie companies have been kind of rolling along for the last 7 years or so, and so 17 years, and so that's that's over basically, and with a bunch of tariffs and a bunch of upsets to the way that we do business, people are saying that, well, the global economy could implode. Okay, that's a thing. And what does that do? Well, what it usually does is it concentrates a lot of wealth in the higher echelons of society because wealthy people don't panic. My last video was about panic, right? Wealthy people just don't panic. And they don't sell stocks on a moment's notice, and they don't dump their bonds. And in fact, they can make money during a downturn, provided it doesn't last forever. They can make some money. So the elites, especially the financial elites, they don't really care. They're like, okay, that's going to work for us. So they don't really stop this stuff. They don't really complain about it, and they're the only ones who could, right? They're the only ones who have the political throw and the influence on it, in this upper echelons of government to pull some strings and get things changed. And they're not going to bother. They're just going to let shit implode. And it gives them an opportunity to take more money from the middle class, implode the middle class. More people will lose their homes and be driven out of their homes. And the homes will be sold for 10 cents on the dollar of value to, venture capital, dark money flows and this kind of stuff. And they buy this stuff up cheap and then they rent them out. And that's one of the reasons why the price of housing is so high, that these venture funds have been buying up housing and just holding on to it and waiting for it to appreciate in value. I mean, that's what they do. They invest in assets, right? And housing can be assets. Yeah, they buy stocks and they buy bonds and they buy, treasuries, but they also buy houses. And then they take them off the market and they rent them. And pretty soon you can't buy a house. Pretty soon that drives up the price. You see what's happening? So when there's a downturn in the economy and people have to, they can't pay the mortgage. These days, they can't buy an insurance for their mortgage because of the insurance industry is bailing out, again, the financial elites. All this by way of saying that this whole thing with tariffs and the price of eggs and drilling for oil and all this stuff, it's going to, people are saying that it could damage the global economy. And that sounds like a bad thing. And, some people think it's a good thing. But I think for most people, unless you're, again, the elites, it's going to be a bad thing. But there is a component of this that is universally a good thing, meaning it cannot be a bad thing. And that is that when you implode the global economy, as we saw with the COVID-19 pandemic, the early days, you remember that? When people stopped traveling and they stopped driving to work and they worked from home and they cocooned and they did all these things. That part of it. The COVID pandemic taught us that if there are massive changes in consumer behavior, that it can reduce the consumption of fossil fuels. Reduce the consumption of fossil fuels. You kind of get it, right? They're buying less, so there's less movement of goods, and there's less manufacturing. People aren't driving to work. They're not getting on airplanes because airplanes are a place to get sick or worse, and so on. So people pull back. They pull back in the case of the pandemic, and fossil fuel consumption dropped measurably. I'm not going to say significantly, but it dropped measurably. And people were noticing even that air quality improved because there were fewer people on the freeways. And there were fewer people in front of my house in the morning driving to and from work, because the road in front of our house is a major north-south corridor connecting the big neighborhood south of us to the freeways that go both to the East Bay and to the peninsula. These are big, big, big destinations for the morning commute. And at the onset of the pandemic, my wife and I walked out front. There was no cars on the street. It was really eerie. I said, well, now you see this? You see this? See what's happening here? There's no cars. It's supposed to be the rush hour. There's no cars. And I know there's no cars on the freeway either. And there's nobody on the commute trains. There's nobody moving around. They're not moving around. They're in voluntary lockdown. They're staying home. Maybe they're taking advantage of a situation, but they're staying home. So I said at the time, this is what it's going to look like, meaning no cars, no traffic, when they shut down fossil fuels. When they decide, okay, we've had enough fossil fuels, global heating is a thing, and we're starting to destroy entire nations with climate change, and we have to do something. And the thing we're going to do is we're going to stop burning fossil fuels. So we've had a taste of that. I noticed it, and I think it was while we were out on the street. I coined this term. I used to use it more, but I'm going to use it now again because it's time for that, because of tariffs. And what I said is I sat out there still on the sidewalk, and I said, this is what it's going to be like without fossil fuels. And then I ticked them off on my fingers. No driving, no flying, no movement of goods, no movement of money, and no jobs. It just came to me in a flash. It just came to me. And that's pretty much what happened during the pandemic in a tiny way, like preview of coming attractions. Okay. So fast forward to now and what is happening. So Donald Trump is going to throw tariffs at everybody. Yeah, who knows if it's going to stick, right? People keep saying he can't do that because some of this stuff has to be approved by Congress, and there's money and taxes involved, and he can do something, but someone else can take him to court, and the Supreme Court will find it, whatever, unconstitutional, overstepping your boundaries. But so maybe he just makes good on a bunch of campaign promises and signs a bunch of things and holds them up for the cameras, and the MAGA crowd all go wild, right? And then 3-4 weeks later, it all gets very quietly swept under the rug, and good boy, Donnie, you did what you said you were going to do, and then we're back to business as usual, right? That's the most likely outcome. But let's just fantasize for a moment, shall we? If this happens, and should it be as bad an outcome as people are projecting, and you may say, well, this is just hyperbole. They're just being nervous Nellies. They're just being Chicken Little, skies falling, whatever. But let's just say that he really does this, and he gets away with it, and it goes forward, and it does have the impacts that people are saying it might or could or must have impacts. And those impacts they don't go away. We're kind of stuck with them because tariffs and imploding the economy and what is it again, right? It's the 5 fingers, no driving, no flying, no movement of goods, no movement of money, and no jobs. Why? Tariffs increase the price of goods. Tariffs is a tax on consumption, not on production. There might be problems for producers who find that they can't sell their goods for the price they want, but it's not costing them any money. It costs the consumer money. So I'll just say that. And there's a lot of people that didn't understand that when Trump was campaigning and tariffs this and punish the Chinese 60% on all their goods. And now that people have had a chance to talk about this, now that he's president, I don't know why it's this way, but now that he's actually president, people start saying, well, so what are tariffs? It's kind of dumb, right? You're going to vote this guy because tariffs are a great idea, pounding on the table, give me tariffs. And you're like, so what is a tariff? I mean, that's really what happened. After the election, people are like, well, so he's doing tariffs? What are those? What impact does that have on me? He's putting tariffs on the Chinese. Isn't that a good thing? Well, it means your cost of your goods at the dollar store, they go up because we pay that. We pay the tariff. Now, in an ideal world, our manufacturers would sort of pick up the slack. They would say, hold on, if this is the price of goods coming from China, I can actually sell the same good made in America at the same price and compete with China finally, because I'm an American company and I don't use slave labor and I don't use prison labor, and and I have to meet environmental regulations, and I have to pay corporate taxes and all these things. So the price of my goods are up here compared to China, but now China's up here because of tariffs. And so that's the idea. In the ideal world, okay, American companies would sit up and say, wait, if that's the cost of Chinese goods, and that's what consumers are now willing to pay, not willing, but they must pay them because that's the only game in town, right? If that's what consumers are willing to pay, I think I can manufacture those goods locally and sell, put those on the market at that price, because that's not a bad price. That's a pretty good price for whatever, right? For that, electric cars, solar panels, whatever. I'm an American company, and even with environmental regulations, I can manufacture at that price. Let's do this. And in an ideal world, that's what would happen. You put tariffs on Chinese good, which raises the price up to here. Then American manufacturers say, well, I couldn't compete down here, but I could compete here, so let's go. And that's the idea. But America has such, our manufacturing sector has been so horribly hollowed out after decades and decades and decades of exporting our manufacturing processes to other countries, like China and Vietnam and Indonesia and the Philippines, Mexico. Mexico's big. We've been doing that for 2 generations. And right now there's so little manufacturing in America that it's pretty safe to say we don't manufacture jack. We don't have to manufacture anything. Really, not really. Made in America is kind of a joke. Assembled in America, right? Your iPhone is made in China and Taiwan. It's assembled maybe somewhere in America. Maybe it's assembled in Mexico. Maybe no part of it is made, assembled, tested, nothing until it gets to America, and it goes on the shelf and it's done. It's completely finished. So things that you think of as American, apple pie, like an iPhone, it's more like a Chinese apple pie, and Mexicans and the Filipinos, and I don't know, there's probably 70, 80 countries that manufacture components for an iPhone. So it's going to be real hard for Apple to onshore that. It would take decades to onshore even a big part of that. I don't even think Apple writes the software anymore. I think even the software comes from overseas, India, Pakistan, places like that. So the price of goods go up to the point where people can't afford them anymore. And so they just don't buy them. They have to keep their money. They just can't afford the goods anymore. And I guess you find out how much U.S. consumption is discretionary. Discretionary means you don't really have to buy it. How often do you really need to update your iPhone by buying a new one? Yeah, it still works, right? I got my Android smartwatch here. I didn't actually wear it today. It's all ratty. I replaced the band once. I need to replace it again. And, it works. It takes my pulse, and it connects to my Samsung phone. And so I can control my phone from my watch, or I can, answer or hang up on calls and that kind of stuff. It is really convenient. It has its own little app store that you can buy apps for it. This is probably 10 years old. It just keeps working. I keep thinking I'd like to get a new one. They're up to like the fifth generation of this same product. I should get a new one. But it still works, So what am I supposed to do with this? So I don't do anything. I keep it. Well, eventually, if the price of things are bad enough, you'll just keep things. They'll keep working, and you'll keep using it, and you'll just won't go ahead and get another one. And what that leads to, with tariffs and expenses, and what that leads to is just a collapse of consumption. And you can't have growth in your economy if you're having a collapse of consumption, especially in the US economy, because we are a consumer economy. We're not really a producer economy. We do produce a lot of food, but food has really tiny profit margins. Okay. It's kind of a joke. If we didn't subsidize farming to the tunes of, $50 billion a year or whatever it is, um, the farmers would just give up. The profit margins are so slim, and they only really produce things with subsidies. It's a joke to think that farming is rugged individuals. It's all socialism. Okay, it really is. But hey, it works, right? We got food. So, um, but it keeps the price of food low. But now we import a lot of food. And so if we're importing food and putting tariffs on it, then the price of food goes up. So pretty soon your money for consumption starts to erode. And now you think long and hard before you replace your smartwatch or your iPhone or your Android phone or anything else, right? Your computer, your camera, your whatever, you keep it. It still works. It's old. It's kind of ratty, but hey, a new one costs twice as much as the one I paid for. So I'm not gonna, whatever. I'm going to keep mine, and that's what you do. And when you don't have constant churn in a consumer economy as ours is, then you get shrinkage. The economy starts to shrink. The churn isn't there. A big part of the US's GDP growth, which is pretty small, it's like 2% a year or something, maybe 3, is churn. So when people just don't buy things, they even stop buying a lot of the food they might because it's just gotten so expensive. You used to buy a jar of peanut butter, and and when it was $2, that was fine. But now it's $8 or $12 a jar, and you're like, why did it get so expensive? Well, tariffs. But so you don't buy it, and you do without peanut butter, and then you do without potato chips, and then you do without fast food. And, you stop eating out once a week or twice a week, and you cook in, and you buy raw materials, and you buy a air fryer and a wok, and you start making your own food, and so you're not buying into the consumer culture. You're not buying and buying every day. You're keeping your money, and you don't have a choice. Everything is so expensive, you really can't spend your money because it's just you'll end up with a jar of peanut butter, but you won't have anything to eat. You'll have a $12 jar of peanut butter, but you won't have potatoes and vegetables and frozen peas or anything else. You'll just have a jar of peanut butter that costs you $12 or 20 or whatever it is. So that leads to economic contraction. Now, here's where things get interesting. Capitalism needs constant economic growth. Arrow points up. Any amount of even just stable economic output is bad. That's really bad. 0% growth, people start jumping out of windows. If you have actual contraction where your GDP is in the negative, meaning your economy is growing smaller, then that's the end of capitalism. Its ability to survive these things is virtually nil, virtually nothing. Any contraction, and it'll be a contracting to get overall contraction. You get contraction everywhere. So home sales decrease, people graduating from college decreases, the number of people entering the workforce decreases, wages decrease, all these kind of problems. The number of companies doing business decreases, meaning an increase in bankruptcies and things like this. So an economic contraction is generally very broad based, and the whole economy is falling apart. If you have, like, I think it's 2 consecutive quarters, 2 consecutive fiscal quarters, there's 4 quarters in a year, 2 consecutive fiscal quarters in a year where you've had economic contraction is considered a recession. I thought it was like 5. I used to think it was 5%. If your economy contracted 5% at all, or maybe this is just an alternative definition, then that's a recession. That's that definition of a recession. And now you have to start doing policy differently. And then beyond a recession, meaning things just keep going that way or maybe getting worse, you get what's called a depression. And depressions are the end of the road. Yeah, depression will pretty much devour a country's economy. It devours everything. The Great Depression, the 1929, which went on for quite a few years, actually. The stock market crash was 1929, wasn't it? Yes, I think it was. But there was a period of collapse running up to that. And then there was a long period after that. And there are people who make the case, and I can argue it, that what got us out of the Great Depression, because depressions are like tar. When you get stuck in them, there's no way out. That what got us out of the Great Depression was the Second World War. And people even say, oh, yeah, Franklin Roosevelt, he conspired. Here's your conspiracies, right? Franklin Roosevelt conspired to get us involved in the Second World War to get us out of the Great Depression. Now, the Great Depression was global, so you'd have to make the case that Mussolini was conspiring and Hitler was conspiring and Chamberlain was conspiring and Hirohito was conspiring. They were all conspiring because it was a global war, right? So, and maybe that happened. I don't know. But, it was the Great Depression. The end of the Great Depression came during the run up to Second World War, because you could take those men, put a uniform on them, hand them a gun and send them overseas and pay them to do that. The government could pay you to be a soldier. And that was a job. And the government could pay you to manufacture rifles. And maybe you didn't have anything to manufacture in the economy during the Great Depression. But when there was a war brewing up, the government would come to you and say, hey, what do you manufacture? You manufacture springs for couches. Well, hey, you're bending metal. You're working with metal. Why don't you make us rifles? Here's the blueprints, and you rejigger your manufacturing line, and you make Enfield rifles or M1s or whatever they were making. And so all of a sudden, these companies that were barely surviving during the Depression, they got roped into the military growth market, what we now call the MIC, the military industrial complex, which lives on to this day. The MIC was so good for American industry and was so good for economic growth and capitalism in general that we kind of never got rid of it. And America right now is a major arms manufacturer and arms exporter. So there you go. People are saying that one of the reasons that Donald Trump isn't going to leave NATO and isn't going to give up on Ukraine is because someone, nudged him with their elbow and say, hey, did you know we're making X hundreds of billions of dollars a year selling weapons to the Europeans because they're scared of Vladimir Putin? Did you know? Hey, Don, wake up and smell the coffee. We're making money over here. And so, he's kind of making different noises about NATO and Europe and Ukraine. I think he got the memo. I think someone just pulled him off the campaign trail and said, sit down here, Donnie. Let me tell you how this shit actually works, pinhead. And they told him there's money in war. What do you mean we're going to end the war in Ukraine? Are you nuts? Listen, man, we're not giving anything away. Whoever told you we were giving money to Ukraine? They're buying from us. We give them old rotten equipment and then they buy equipment from us. And, now he's talking differently. And Vladimir Putin is all scared to death because Donald Trump just realized that you can make money with warfare. Ermagerd. Well, yeah, that started back with the Great Depression. And we were in an economic collapse at the time. And the start of the war, whose ever idea that was, that got industry reborn. In fact, using that example in modern times, Russia has made their economy a war economy. And they've had really, really good, steady economic growth over the last 2 years, even though they can't sell oil and they can't import electronics and they can't buy anything from the West. They can't sell to the West, but that their economy is going, like gangbusters. But that's because they're investing in their MIC. They're making rifles and bullets and bombs and airplanes and tanks and all the things, right? And yeah, so if your economy is shaking and you're tanking, well, then you can make tanks. And that's what got us out of the Great Depression. And the general trend right now of gearing up for a war is kind of this tacit understanding that that's another way of doing consumerism, because every bullet you fire is consumed, and every tank that gets blown up on the battlefield is a consumption. And you have to make another bullet, you have to make another tank. And even if you're blowing up men, that reduces unemployment, because unemployment is living people who are not working. And if there's fewer living people, then unemployment has gone down. So, getting back to the topic, which is how this blows up the world. But maybe when, Donald Trump makes good on his threats to tariff all these other countries and make us, I don't know what he thinks he's doing with that, make us wealthy. I don't know how that works. He must be thinking he gets a cut. I don't know what his thinking is. Because, yeah, this is not going to help our industries. Our industries are gone. The only thing that can help our industries now is the World War III. But he thinks that by creating tariffs, he's going to tax the Chinese and they're going to have to pay us to sell us their goods and blah, blah, blah. All it's going to do is raise prices in America and elsewhere in the world. And then, of course, there's a tariff war. So not only is there increases in the stuff that we buy, there's increases in the stuff that we sell. And when there's tariffs on our goods that we're trying to export, then we don't export because people over there can't afford our goods because they're too expensive. So our Ford trucks and our Dodges and our iPhones or whatever becomes too expensive because of tariffs. So our businesses contract, the global economy contracts, and watch what happens. No driving or less. Less or no driving, no flying, no movement of goods, no movement of money, and no jobs. That's what I've just spent 27 minutes outlining. Why those 5 things hold. When you do anything to stall the economy, like applying tariffs willy-nilly left, right, and center, you decrease the velocity of money. You decrease economic growth. You decrease industrialization. You decrease sales. You decrease consumption. You decrease the movement of goods. You decrease the movement of money. So the 5 things that you'll see during a pandemic, the 5 things you'll see if we stop shipping fossil fuels, in particular crude oil, you also get if you collapse the economy or even just put it into a tailspin. And the 5 things are the 5 things that happen in any of those scenarios. The pandemic, we saw this. You would also get it in the case of crude oil becomes unavailable or too expensive to use, or a global tariff war. You'll see the same 5 things. The behavior is exactly the same. What you will see is no driving. People can't afford gasoline. People can't afford cars. They can't afford repair. They can't afford insurance. No driving, no flying, no movement of goods. There are no goods. Nobody's manufacturing and nobody can afford whatever's coming out of China. No movement of money as a result of these other 3, and no jobs because of these 4. So these are like 3 points on a line. And at the end of that line is an arrow. And that arrow from no driving, no flying, no movement of goods, no movement of money, and no jobs, those 5 points and the line through them and the arrow at the end is pointing to economic collapse. Economic collapse. Nobody wants that. Donald Trump doesn't even want that. I don't think he does. I don't think he's thought too hard about it. Doesn't seem to be that kind of a guy. But let's assume he doesn't want that. But he wants to make good on all his campaign promises. Well, if he does all those things and the 5 things happen, and those 5 things, when you draw a line through them, put an arrow on the end of that line, is pointing to economic collapse. Watch what happens. I have one problem, and that solves my problem. I have one problem. And you, whether you know it or not, or believe it or not, or understand it or not, you also have one problem. And it's the same problem that I have. My problem, and the thing I can't find a solution for and can't even imagine a solution for. And I'm a clever guy. I cannot imagine how to solve my one problem and your one problem is global heating. Global heating is caused by excesses of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The excess of greenhouse gases traps heat in the atmosphere. Eventually, the atmosphere gets hot, and then you have a hot atmosphere. Therefore, you have a hot Earth because the atmosphere is part of the Earth. And what causes the excess emissions of CO2 and methane and other greenhouse gases is consumption and mining and working with fossil fuels in primarily crude oil, but also natural gas and coal. So when we dig these things out of the ground, when we move them around, when we use them for manufacturing, when we burn them, when we make fuels out of them and burn the fuels, and we have all these waste products and all this pollution, it all contributes to excess greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, creating global heating. And once you have global heating, you have all the things. So you've got heat waves as a start, okay? And then you have excess evaporation. And when you have excess evaporation, you have excess moisture. When you have excess moisture, you have excess rain, which means things like extreme weather. So yes, rainstorms, but also tornadoes, hurricanes. It's a long list, okay? And when you have excess rain and tornadoes and hurricanes and all the things, you get flooding, you get landslides. And when you're not getting those kind of things, the flip side of too much heat is drying. And so you can get droughts because it doesn't matter where the moisture comes from. The moisture can come from the sea, which most of the time it does, but it can also come from green plants and soil. So if you have a big heat dome sitting over a parcel of land the size of the Western United States, and it's cooking everything and sucking all the moisture out, then you have a dry area. And from dryness, what do we get? We get, again, heat waves, and we get crop failures. We get business failures because, they can't, well, okay. We get failure of electrical systems, which can lead, and between the other supply chain disruptions, you can get business failures and you can get whole community failures. Then from the heat and the dryness and the things that don't work anymore, you might run out of water. You might run out of food, at least locally. Maybe you can still import food from somewhere else. But if it's a large region that's being impacted by a collapse of the food supply, then maybe your food has to come from far away. Why do you have to come from other countries? Oh, wait, we have tariffs on things. So because you couldn't, because there's been this heat wave and all this drying and all the water is being evaporated, and the water even evaporates out of the lakes and rivers, right? Because there's collapse of the local food chains, food supply. Suddenly you're having to import food. That means that the price of, say, wheat goes from whatever we could sell to ourselves internally to whatever we have to import, right? To make up for what we can't grow locally. And who knows where that's coming? What if it's coming from Ukraine? What if it's coming from Russia? What if they don't want to sell it to us? What if they can't? There's a war on. What if someone else in Europe is willing to pay more than we are? And and then people are bitching and complaining that the price of bread has gone up and the price of tortillas has gone up and flour can't afford it and blah blah blah, right? And people notice that we're having to import more food because our local food supply has become impoverished and endangered from heat, from global heating, from the greenhouse effect, from fossil fuel consumption. But if we, for economic reasons, have a economic contraction, and therefore we have less or no driving, flying, movement of goods, movement of money and jobs, we don't have these things, okay? Then all of this feeds on itself, and soon we're burning less fossil fuels. And if there's a massive implosion, it just keeps eating at itself, eroding. And we may get to a point where we don't burn fossil fuels at all. You have nowhere to go. You've lost your job, and you have no way to get there. You can't afford gasoline. You can't even afford the payment on your car anymore. And you're home. you're done. You're just done, and you're not consuming fossil fuels. So what does that do to fossil fuel consumption in the world? If it's a big enough global collapse, then you end up with a collapse in fossil fuel consumption. And if you have a collapse of fossil fuel consumption, then the fossil fuel producers, right? What's the magic number we have to hear all the time? 100 million barrels of oil a day. That's a lot of millions of barrels of oil every day. Well, if there's a generalized economic collapse because of tariffs and tariffs on tariffs and tariff wars and all these other things, people run out of money, the manufacturing jobs never materialize, blah, blah. Then we may end up bankrupting energy companies. They go bankrupt. What happens when they go bankrupt? Because they're not selling 100 million barrels of oil every day. Then they lay off their people and they shut down their processing facilities, and maybe they even shut down some pipelines. And there's no money to pay for this stuff, and so who's going to pay for it? And maybe the U.S. government will take it on. That's called nationalizing. They might nationalize energy production. They might nationalize Standard Oil, Exxon. They might nationalize, Valero and all the other natural gas companies, and they might nationalize the service station companies and just tell them to stay open, and we'll pay you. The government will pay you a wage. Yes, it's socialism, but do you want the fuels or not? Yes, we're being socialist. Do you want to drive? Do you want to get to work? Do you want to have a job? Well, then shut up about it. And the government can nationalize the energy industry and maybe even the insurance industry, right? Well, how is the government going to pay for all this? If there's no driving, no flying, no movement of goods, no movement of money, and no jobs, then where are they getting the money, right? They're supposed to be getting money from taxes. But if people aren't driving, there's no fuel tax. If people aren't flying, there's no tax on air miles. If there's no manufacturing and shipping goods around, then there's no VAT taxes or any of the rest of it. And there's no tariffs either. And if there's no movement of money, then there's no buying, selling of treasuries, buying and selling of bonds. There's no interest being paid. Probably interest rates have dropped to the floor anyway because now we're in a recession or a depression. So the Fed lowers the interest rates to zero. So no one's making money on interest, right? And then there's no job. So there's no income tax. There's no people aren't making contributions to Social Security because they don't got a job. And so it just like this. And that implodes the fossil fuel-based global economy. And remember, I got one problem. So do you, whether you agree or not. You've got one problem. And what is that one problem? Global heating. And what's that caused by? Fossil fuels. But if there's no driving or flying or movement of goods or movement of money or jobs, then we do the thing. We just did the thing that I couldn't imagine how we could do. We stop burning fossil fuels. We leave them in the ground. Except for the companies that have been nationalized by the government, and maybe they nationalize the energy companies because they need the fossil fuels for the military, right? And of course for the elites and their private jets and their whatever, right? Except for a trickle of fossil fuels to keep the government working, the military working, and the elites happy, it's over. So rather than 100 million barrels of oil a day, maybe it's 10 million, maybe it's 1 million, right? So where's global heating going to come from? Well, the truth is, we're stuck with global heating. The CO2 that's in the atmosphere now from 100 years of drying and flying and moving goods, the CO2 that's in the atmosphere now is going to be there for thousands, if not millions of years. And the number varies depending on who you're talking to and what you consider to be, progress on that front. But anyway, it's a long time. It's longer probably than humans will exist on Earth. We'll be extinct before a substantial amount of what we have done to the atmosphere is reversed by nature. So that's a thing. But if we can stop contributing to it and making it worse on a daily basis, right? 100 million barrels of oil a day, that's going someplace. If we could stop making it worse, then maybe we're okay. I doubt it, but maybe it's a possibility now. So as I'm thinking about Donald Trump raising tariffs and tariff wars and zinging and zanging at each other, and eventually like World War III, where we destroy each other's economies and people lose their jobs, and they lose their lives, and they houses catch on fire, and they living in tents, and it would just destroy everything. In this way, we destroy civilization, and civilization is what's burning the fossil fuels. The driving and the flying and the movement of goods and the movement of money and the jobs and all the churn and Cheetos and the burgers and Teslas and right commuting 40 miles every day. All that just ratchets down and stops. And maybe we don't get a fossil fuel driven apocalypse. That's one possible outcome. Now, I want to be very clear on this. I'm not stupid. I understand. If there's no driving and there's no flying and there's no movement of goods and there's no movement of money, meaning no one's getting paid, no one's investing, and there's no jobs, people are going to be in a world of hurt. It's going to be a dumpster fire. And what are you going to do with it? How are you going to pay your mortgage? How are you going to feed yourself, right? This is crazy. What are you talking about, Cougar? You can't talk this way. I'm just saying that it could happen. And if it did, it might be enough by itself to save us from global heating. And let me tell you something. You've got one problem. You don't believe that. You don't know that. But I am not alone in telling you, you've got a big problem. It's called global heating or climate change. There are people right now out in the blogosphere that are talking about this as an extinction event. No, probably not for humans. They say for humans. I don't really buy that personally. We're such rat bastards. Everything else on the planet will go extinct, including the rats and the cockroaches, before humans do. We're just awful. We'll be eating the rats and the cockroaches. We'll extinct the rats and the cockroaches, eating them before we go extinct. I don't think there's X risk for humans, but people might end up living in caves, right? That would really suck, right? That's why I'm writing this book that I'm writing. It's like, okay, maybe I got to figure this shit out. Hold on, what would I do? What would I do differently if it were up to me? If it were up to me and I had to do things differently, and Donald Trump's tariffs worked and we imploded the economy and no driving, no flying, no movement of goods, no movement of money, no jobs, and the fossil fuel consumption collapsed and the global economy collapsed and then everybody went to war with everybody else. And pretty soon, if you're not actually in the army, getting army food, then you're scrambling around looking for food, right? That could be the scenario. And so in this book I'm writing, it's like, well, what do I do about that? What would I do about that? And there's a bit of self-insertion, meaning as a writer, as an author, I'm kind of inserting myself into this book. I'm sort of the narrator, but it's me in my fictional work thinking about and thinking through what I would do. Because I know this is what has to happen. We're not going to voluntarily stop burning fossil fuels. We're not going to do it. We can't. It's too scary. They're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Nobody can do this thing we need to do. But it can happen anyway. Well, there you go. So you didn't plan on this. You didn't plan on derailing the train, but now the train is derailed. So what do you do about your train being derailed? You didn't get on the train, bought the ticket, planning on being derailed. You were planning on getting to your destination, but now you're derailed. It's like, oh, wait, we're derailed? Good Lord. Now what? And that's what you got to start thinking about. It's like, okay. Donald Trump is going to tariff goods. There's going to be a tariff war. Tariff wars lead to economic collapse. Economic collapse leads to collapse of the middle class. The middle class, some of them crawl at the very end up into the elites, and but most of them, right, 99% of the middle class descends into the lower class, and the middle class is gone. And that's how most of the human history has been. There was no middle class. What are you talking about? The middle class was only made possible by fossil fuels. So without fossil fuels and without a global economic system that's growing every year and burning 100 million barrels of oil a day, every single day, yeah, that's the thing. Without that going on, then you don't have a middle class. And maybe some people will get lucky and they'll float up, be part of the creme de creme. But most people will just be part of the dregs to dregs. Okay, that's what my future is going to be. But wait, that solves the problem, which is global heating. And that's a real fucking problem. Because that can kill us. That can kill you. It's going to kill lots of people. I mean, I've done some basic math. I'm not in the mood to explain it today. I probably should. I'm not going to. I'm tired. My best estimate is a 99% die off of humans on Earth. And that's a combination of we don't know how to live in nature anymore. Without built habitat, which is built and maintained with fossil fuels, the electric grid, the water, the sewer treatment, the food deliveries to your local store, your car, your fuel, your job, your everything. Without that, then you don't have a story. You just don't. There's no nature. We destroyed that. Then there's no built habitat. We have to abandon that because without fossil fuels, you can't have that. You think you can, but you can't. You can't even have Mad Max, okay? And because we have no natural habitat to fall back into, and we're going to lose our built habitat, then we have no habitat. Is that clear? And you may think, oh, well, that's not a big deal. Yes, it is a big deal. Because by definition, your habitat is what gives you your food, water, clothing, shelter, security, community, everything. And, when humans were hunter-gatherers, our habitat was whatever, the forest, the swamp, even, the glaciers were, people hunt seals and, they have their sled dogs and whatever. That's your habitat. And you have everything you need. It's all there. And there's trees for you to cut down and make into lumber or make into, log cabins. And there's animals everywhere. There's herds of deer and elk or gazelle if you're in Africa. And there's plenty of food. And all you have to do is find some way to catch it. And of course, there's predators and there's other harms. And you have to avoid those things. But, 3.5 pounds of brain, we can figure that part out. So we had habitat. We had a natural habitat. But we were not 8,000 million people. That's 8 billion. We were not 8,000 million people. We were maybe 2 billion people on Earth. Maybe, much, much later during the Middle Ages, we were maybe 400 million. Still living up to our elbows in the soil, working the soil, planting, harvesting, having crop failures and all the things that that we look back on as a shiver. Oh, I can't live like that. Well, it's true enough. You don't live like that. But in the absence of fossil fuels, or if there's a general economic collapse, global economic collapse, such that we can't do fossil fuels anymore, we can't get them out of the ground, we can't ship them in the pipelines. There's no one to drive the truck to deliver the fuels to your service station. There's no one on the tanker to deliver the oil to the refinery. Nobody works at the refinery. Nobody repairs the refinery. Nobody repairs the cars. It just all kind of dries up. Then you don't have your worked habitat anymore. And there is no natural habitat. So you have no habitat. That's how those lines connect. And without habitat, without the food and the water and the shelter and the clothing and the security and the community and all the things that we used to have back in the day, 600 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 400 years ago, the things that we used to have just naturally, you can't have anymore. You don't have those things working for you now, unless you're a gardener in your backyard. You don't have those things working for you at all. Do you have chickens? Do you have pigs? Do you have a cow and you have milk and cheese and whatever? Okay, right. You don't have any of those things. You don't have a horse. You don't have a horse to pull a plow, and you don't have land to plow. You don't have seeds to plant in the furrow that you plowed with your horse and your plow. None of this stuff is working for you. So you can't even go back to 400 years ago. You're going to have to skip all the way back and go back to, 8,000 years ago, when people literally just lived out in the wilds, except you're going to have to find wilds to live in. And that's going to be really difficult. And that's why it's pretty easy for me to come up with a number that says, yeah, you know, the last time we lived in natural habitat without a whole lot of industry to support us, there was maybe 8 billion people in the world. Well, let me do the math for you. If there's 8 million, sorry, too many zeros. If there's 8 million people left, that's a 99.9% die off from current levels. Now, 8 million might be a bit extreme, maybe 80 million, right? Maybe 80 million people can live on this planet without fossil fuels. And a certain number of those are the elites, and they're going to have fossil fuels anyway if they have to dig them up by hand, right? They'll use labor, slave labor. They'll use robots. They'll use AI. They'll do whatever they have to do. They'll have fossil fuels. They'll have their private jets. They'll have their Maseratis and Lamborghinis. And, we'll all be working for them. Please, master, feed me, right? And so they'll be fine. But, they're going to be the only ones. And how many elites are there in the world with private jets and Maseratis and expensive watches? 8 million? And maybe you add another 72 million people to support them and wash their hair for them and, clean their clothes and wipe their ass or whatever they need done, right? There's another 72 million of us. Well, that's 80 million people on Earth being supported by whatever little trickle of economic activity there still is. That's probably no iPhones. But do these people need iPhones? No, there's nobody to talk to, and there's no business being done. And if they want their slave to do something, they'll just say, "Hey, you, come over here, wash my hair." They don't need to call you on a cell phone. They don't need to make an appointment. There's not going to be any hairdresser. They got a hairdresser who lives on their property, and their property is 12 acres. It's like being Agamemnon again or Knossos or something. You got this huge property with gigantic cyclopean walls, 80 feet high and 20 feet thick at the base. And, keeping the zombies out there, and you and your people are inside, and most of your people they're slaves. You don't pay them anything. You feed them and they're happy to have the food. Thank you, master. Let me wash your hair again today. It's not going to be like you think. Because unless you're inside the walls where the fossil fuels are still coming in, you got no game. And that's your 80 million humans left over on Earth. And do I need to do the math? That's a 99% die-off. I just do that math in my head. That's a 99% die-off. And how bad do you think fossil fuel-induced global heating is going to get with a 99% die-off? It's not going to get. I mean, it'll get worse for a while, and there'll be repercussions from what we've already done that kind of fuck things up. But it's not going to get a whole lot worse, and it might even start to get better. Good, actually, with a massive economic collapse and a 99% die-off of human beings that ends up with 80 million people, 8 million of which are the elites, and the other 72 million of which are their servants. Yeah, that works. That solves my one problem: global heating. Because global heating is extinction risk. And a 99% die-off, as bad as that sounds, that's not extinction. You got 80 million humans left over. There's not 80 million of anything else on this planet. There's not 80 million elephants, 80 million gorillas, 80 million zebras, 80 million aardvarks, 80 million beavers. There's not 80 million of anything. And we're big animals, and we have a huge footprint, and we need a lot of food and a lot of entertainment and a lot of sex. And if there's 80 million of us still on the planet, that's a lot of people. Yet that's 1% of the current population. 1%. That's how many people are on this planet right now. 8,000 million people. That's 8 billion people. 8,000 million people. 80 million is what this planet can support without constant 100 million barrels per day of crude oil injections every single day. So, yes, Donald Trump may crash the global economy. He may start World War III accidentally, right? Because of economic stresses. That's what happened during the Great Depression. We got World War II. So if we have a Great Depression again, we might get World War III, right? Right? Isn't that how that works? Right? Am I right? So crashing the global economy, starting World War III, we're this close to it anyway, right? I mean, come on. How many more does this really need to launch us into World War III. What's World War III? China invading Taiwan, North Korea bombing South Korea and Japan, Russia invading Europe and nuking European cities. That will never happen, Cougar. You're so full of shit. Yeah, you think so? The people didn't think World War II was going to happen either. Peace in our time. That's what they were saying. That shit didn't work out, did it? That shit never works out. You can't have nice things. You can't have nice things. All you can have is war. And when the global economy collapses because of tariffs and other bullshit going on, thank you, Vladimir. Thank you, Xi Jinping. Thank you, Rocket Man. When the global economy implodes and everyone's at each other's throat, and you're either a soldier or you're digging turnips in your backyard to survive, right? Then you have an economic collapse. Boom! No driving, no flying, no movement of goods, no movement of money, and no jobs. Boom! And you say goodbye to 100 million barrels of fossil fuel a day. And maybe with a 99% die-off of humanity, 8 million, I'm using these figures, these are round figures, 8 million elites, that's a lot of elites, but I think we could make 8 million elites, and 72 million servants, right? That's like 7 to 1. Yeah, 7 to 1. That's about what they would want. They would need, a family of 10 elites would need 70 servants. They would need 70 servants who they're not paying a dime. They're just, these servants are happy to live behind the walls and have a reliable source of food, electricity, and shelter, and clothing, and security, and the other things. You'd be happy to live behind the walls. And if you have to wipe the old man's ass and wash his wife's hair every day, then you would do it because you're getting the things you can't get outside the walls. Zombies outside the walls. Not real zombies. Just people that are in advanced stages of starvation and malnutrition and disease because no fossil fuels and there's no natural habitat and they have nothing to eat except each other, which I work into the book because that's the thing. That's the thing. So it's really easy for me sitting here thinking tariffs, World War III, limited nuclear exchange, invading Taiwan, bombing South Korea, taking all that chip manufacturing offline, blowing up the oil fields in Saudi Arabia, sinking all the oil tankers, blowing up the pipelines that go through Europe, sabotage, warfare, limited nuclear exchange, a couple of major capitals in Europe nuked, vaporized. Yeah, you wouldn't have to even have a full-scale World War III. Just have like a 90-day dust-up, right? Blow up the global economy. Poof, gone, baby, gone. In my book, it takes 3 weeks. 3 weeks for the global economy to implode. And I detail it, excruciating detail. This is what happened, and this is why, and then this happened, and here's why, and this is why this other thing became inevitable, and then this is what they found, and this is what we noticed, and then suddenly we didn't have these things, and then we didn't have that stuff, and it's just like falling dominoes. It's just 3 weeks. It's gone. Bang! It's gone. Poof! It's gone. Nobody's driving. Nobody's flying. Nobody's moving goods around the planet. Nobody's moving money. There is no money. What money? What was money? I can't even remember money. And no one has a job. Everybody has work. Oh, yes. Oh, you're very busy. You're very busy. Everybody's very busy. The children, the elders, the men, the women, the disabled, everybody. And you're looking left and right, and this person's working with you and that person's working with you, and you're both working on the same thing, and it's food and it's water and it's clothing and it's shelter and it's security, and get the walls up and get people on those walls at night and make sure no one gets in the wall, and if someone's banging on the wall, bang on it from your side and keep that wall up. collect the water and find the seeds. And when you go to the hardware store, you go to the Ace Hardware, whatever, you don't want the money in the till, and you don't want even the bottled water. You need the seeds, and you need the tools, and you need the fertilizer, and you get everything you can find. And seeds and planting and sowing and reaping and harvesting and laying up your food and preserving your food and having tools and being able to build and finding materials, stealing materials if you have to. And when people are abandoning their homes, then the homes are resources. You take off the roofing, take off the plywood, take down the walls, pull all the wiring out of the walls. And, I build houses. I know how this shit is built. I know how valuable the houses are. When the Home Depot has burned to the ground and all the lumber is gone and all the employees have left and the trucks will never come to Home Depot again and the Lowe's has been abandoned and everything has been looted and everything has been taken, then that house right across the street where no one's living in it anymore, maybe the couple died, and they just had a heart attack and stroke and died, and that's their home and no one's living there. We buried them in their own backyard. That's wood. That's copper wire. That's plumbing. That's sinks and toilets and whatever. And now you can build things. You can add second stories to some of your existing houses. Just do a roof jack and just put another second story in, and move more people in. And people, you got a little bit of land. You got yourself. You got your first floor, and you can move your own in-laws and family, extended family who are struggling in whatever, Minnesota, Nevada, Utah. Move them into the second story. But you need materials and you can't find them, but you can scavenge them. And everyone's thinking the same thing. You're like, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? We're 2 weeks into this thing. We're 3 weeks into this thing. None of us have eaten for 6 days. What are we going to do? Fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it. Define your problems. Define your solutions, whatever they are. There may not be many, and you may have to just hope for the best. Get on with it. So this book I'm writing, I'm thinking of it as a user's manual. You see? It's a user's manual for the end of the world. A user's manual for the end of the world. There's 1,000 things you have to fix that are broken without fossil fuels. The 5 categories that I just mentioned, the 5 things that are going to happen to you on that day, the 5 things that are going to happen because of Donald Trump's tariff war, okay, or the onset of World War III. The 5 things that are going to happen to every single soul, man, woman, and child, and their dogs and cats living on the planet. The 5 things: no driving, no flying, no movement of goods, including food, no movement of money, you won't have any, and no jobs, okay? Those things that are going to happen to you are going to plunge you headfirst into my book. My book. Because this is what I think about all the time. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What? 5 visible outcomes. There's 1,000 things you have to fix because you can't drive and you can't fly and you can't move your food and you can't move your money and you don't have a job. There's 1,000 things you now have to fix. 1,000 things that are broken for you. Will you have fresh water? Will you have electricity? Where's your food going to come from? It's not going to be at the supermarket. Where the fuck is it going to be? And so to fix just that one problem, you're going to need land, and you're going to need seeds, and you're going to need tools, and you're going to need irrigation, and you're going to need a community, because planting and protecting the crops and watering and then harvesting and preserving and sharing the food, this takes a bunch of people. That's why we had villages, okay? This whole Little House on the Prairie meme is hogwash. It takes hundreds of people to make a village. It takes hundreds of people to bring in a crop, especially if you have things like corn and wheat. It takes 100 people to do that harvest, because you're out there bending over, cutting it with a scythe, a hand scythe, which you won't even have. You're going to have to reinvent that shit. How the hell are you going to reinvent a hand scythe, for fuck's sake? You're going to have to reinvent the scythe. You're going to have to reinvent threshing floors. Why? Because that's how you get the wheat berries out of the chaff. And then you're going to have to reinvent threshing floors, flails. You don't even know what that is. You're going to have to reinvent mills to mill your wheat berries into flour, A mill, that means millstones. That means some way to turn the millstones. You can use animal labor. You can get an animal to walk around in a circle. Doesn't sound like a very good life, but they'll do it because they don't know what else to do. You can get an animal to walk around in a circle and turn a millstone, and you can have someone sitting on top of the millstone feeding berries into it in the middle because there's a hole in the middle. Not that you know any of that. I know that because I've been thinking about this shit for 10 fucking years. Because I'm worried that there's no way out. There's no way out. Welcome to my world. There's no way out. And Donald Trump is going to do a trade war and tariffs, and the economy, the global economy is already teetering. And then China is going to invade Taiwan because that's what you do. And North Korea is going to nuclear bomb South Korea because that's what you do. And then Vladimir Putin's going to say, fuck it. And he's going to nuke the capital cities of the Baltic states because that's what you do. And then the economy just evaporates. The global economy just collapses. And then what do? Because you won't be driving or flying or moving goods, including food, or moving money because you won't have any, or having a job. You won't be doing any of those things. Now you have 1,000 problems. And each of those problems has 100 steps to solve that one problem. And most people won't do it. They just won't do it. They'll just lay down and die. Most people won't have the mental throw to even wrap their head around even one thing. They'll just go ape shit. They'll just go completely, they'll just chimp out, and they'll just shooting their guns and Mad Max and zombie apocalypse, and they'll just die. They'll kill each other. In their madness, they'll just turn on their families and each other, just like they're doing now. They'll just, the teenagers will kill the parents, and the parents will kill the tinies, and some of it will be religious cultism, and some of it will be madness, and some of it will be just absolute raging insanity. But that's what'll happen because they don't know what to do, because they can't figure out their life, because they got no water, and they got no food, and they got no shelter, and they got no clothing, and they got no governance, they got no story. They got nothing. They got nothing, and they got nothing, and they have no community. And all they got is a big barking dog and an AR-15 and 10,000 rounds of ammunition and a huge Ford truck, lifted truck with big tires that doesn't have any gas in it, and they can't figure their shit out. And that's how you get a 99% die-off. It's just like 3 weeks. 4 weeks, it's done. One and done. 1 month, and it's over. And then there's just whoever's left, and they're probably behind fences, and they're probably scared shitless, right? You put up your fences, you boarded up the front of your house, you put up fences between the houses, you're with your neighbors, and you're pooling your resources, and you're talking to each other, and what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And it's all this shooting, and all this smoke and fire, and all these people screaming, and do we let them in? Do we help them? No, we can't, because we barely survive ourselves. We got 20 cans of food, and maybe we can, if we ever get out of here, we can raid some of the houses next door and find some food. And maybe not even that, because we can hear them breaking into the homes over here and breaking into the homes over there. And by the time they're all done and gone and starved and eating each other, then we come out from our fences and our front doors and looking around, there's nothing left. It's been 30 days of nothing but absolute ruin. And we had our fences, and we were quiet, and we were like little mice hiding in our little hidey hole, and we had enough food to get by, and we didn't quite starve, and the water didn't get quite shut off completely, and it was like, and then the world gets really quiet. And when I think about Donald Trump and his tariff wars and the onset of World War III, that's what I come to. The end of modernity and the end of fossil fuel consumption. Because it starts with, getting it out of the ground and delivering it and doing all the other things. And when modernity implodes and there's no fossil fuel deliveries, certainly not 100 million barrels a day, not even 1 million barrels a day, not even 100,000 barrels a day. And then we solve our problem with global heating. Now, it's true you have 1,000 other problems, but that one went away. So there you go, right? That's a W. We'll take our wins. We'll take our W. Now we have a bunch of other problems, but these are kind of manageable. I couldn't stop global heating. Neither could you. Neither could you and I together. Neither could you and I and all our friends and relatives together. We couldn't stop global heating. We couldn't even really stop driving and flying and buying goods at the store. No, we couldn't do anything. So we just sort of muddle along and hope it gets fixed somehow. And then one day, boom, Donald Trump passes too many tariffs and there's a trade war. And then there's World War III as a result. And boom, wham, the whole thing collapses. And so there you and I are. Well, I guess that solved global heating. Well, that was interesting. That wasn't on my bingo card. Wasn't looking for that one, but there it is. So I guess we can move on now. We don't need any more IPCC reports, no sir, and we don't need any conference of the parties either. And as for all those Paris treaties and the Kyoto Accords, it's like, well, I guess that's kind of a moot point now, isn't it? Because we just blew the global economy to rat shit. So, yep, that's fixed in a bad way, but I'll take it. And now what am I going to do for water and food and shelter and security and community and electricity and communications? And how am I going to educate my children? And what are we going to do for shelter? And how are we going to build the world over again from scratch? And what are we starting? What do we even have? What are we starting from? Do we have internet? Anything? Do we have any electricity? I mean, we have all these cars sitting around with no gas in their tanks, but what are they good for? I don't know. They look familiar, but I can't imagine what I'm going to do with all these things. They're no good. They're completely useless. Your whole life just suddenly doesn't make any sense. And now you have 1,000 things to do in order to survive. And you have to figure all that out in about 100 days. You got about 100 days to completely reboot your life from everything that you thought was sacred and eternal and forever. You have to start over. Well, you're going to be working with what you've got, aren't you? You could give some thought to that. You could give some thought to that. What do you want? What do you want to have when you have to start over from scratch? What is your scratch? What do you have? I'm writing the user's manual for how to pull yourself back on your feet after the end of modernity. It's not easy. I don't have any emotional investment in this. I'm too much of a scientist and an engineer to get worked up over any of it. I'm pretty dispassionate. I'm kind of a cool character. I'm a little bit cold. It doesn't really bother me. It's just a job, right? It's just a thing I gotta fix. Another goddamn thing I gotta fix. Fine. All right, fine. How am I gonna do this? So I'm writing the user's manual. I'm writing the user's manual. What do you do? How do you start? What do you do first? What do you do second? What are the things you're going to need? How do you build a community? How do you make sure they're the right people? How do you make sure that we all agree on what we're supposed to do? Who's going to be the leader? Who's going to be the follower? What's it look like when we're working together? What's it actually look like? What are people talking about? How are they eating? How are they raising their children? How are the children going to school? What's it look like when people are cooperating instead of living their lives completely separately? What's it look like? How do they do that? What do they say? How do they approach each other? Hi, neighbor. How are you doing? Sucks, doesn't it? Yeah, well, it sucks for me too. Should we talk about that? I mean, you just start by talking to your neighbor and saying, well, that was interesting. World War III lasted a week. That was unexpected. Have you been able to buy any gasoline for the last 2 weeks? No, me neither. Well, what do you think we should do about that? I don't really have a plan. You got a plan? Got any ideas? Give me some of your ideas. I got a couple of ideas. I don't have a plan, but I got some thoughts. Maybe we can make a plan. And what about those people over there? Go over here. We're doing some planning here. We got nothing. But we're going to combine our ideas, and maybe there's some resources we don't know about, and maybe we can figure this out. 5 of us is not enough. Maybe we need 20 people. What about, you know anybody? Bring your friends and family over here, okay? Friend. Now we got 20 people. Okay. Here's our situation. The global economy has imploded. It's gone. Say goodbye to it. No, I don't want to hear about the Donald Trump is going to ride in on a white horse and fix everything and give everybody $100. I don't want to hear about that. Here we are. This is what we got. We got each other, and anything we bring: food, water, technology, knowledge, skills, materials, tools, right? Seeds, knowledge, things your grandmother taught you, how to preserve vegetables, how to make clothing out of cloth, whatever we got, whatever we've got between the 20 of us. Okay, now the 25. See, someone just noticed you were talking, so now they want to join your conversation. How do you do this? How do you do this? Okay, how do you get started? How do you lift? How do you fall hard and then lift yourself up, and not go racing off into the the sunset of the world, shooting everything you can see with your AR-15? Not doing that, but doing something else, right? Something a little more productive than inviting the rapture. Okay, something a little more productive than that. Because it starts with a trade war. A trade war becomes a recession, which becomes a depression, which, just like the last time, sparks off a world war, which implodes the global economy, which disrupts the supply chains for food, energy, electricity, parts, everything, right? And then pretty soon you're standing in the middle of the street talking to your 6 or 8 closest neighbors and saying, well, that was a thing. And now what? Yes, we could wait for the government to come in and rescue us, if they still exist, if the government still exists. I heard Washington, D.C. took a nuke. So maybe that's not a plan, waiting for them to unnuke themselves. Maybe that's not the plan. What other plan do we have? Now's the time to start having that thought. And maybe, if you're lucky, that conversation. What are we going to do? This is not looking good. And even if it continues and it doesn't blow up, we still got global heating, and that's going to blow everything up. Go talk to the people in LA County. Ask them how that's working out for them. Ask the people in Florida how that's working out for them. Ask the people in Western North Carolina how that's working out. It ain't. That's the short of it. TLDR is they're fucked. They are royally screwed. They need to be having this conversation right now. But we all need to be having this conversation right now. Collapse early and beat the rush. That should be the motto. That's the meme. Collapse early and avoid the rush. At least start thinking about it, because it's begun. It starts out with tariffs, and then becomes trade wars, and then it becomes, deporting the immigrants, and then it becomes disruptions in the food supplies, and then it becomes a recession, and then it becomes a depression, and then it becomes violence, and then it becomes revolutions, and then it becomes civil wars, and then it becomes World War III, and then one day you wake up and it's gone. It's gone. And it's not coming back. And now what? Wow. And it could happen in just a few weeks. You wake up one morning and it's gone. It does solve my one problem with global heating, because when it's gone and there's no driving, no flying, no movement of goods, no movement of money, and no jobs, when all of that has blown itself to rat shit, then we solved our problem. Solved, for certain definitions of the word solve, global heating. Not the way I wanted it. Not the way people are imagining solving that problem. But it works. So if it works, then I guess that's what we get. I'm not hoping for it, but I can see it coming. And when you don't drive and you don't fly and you don't move your goods and you don't move your money and you don't have a job, Well, then you're going to understand a little better what I'm talking about right now. People are thinking the world will blow up, it'll be a zombie apocalypse, and the rapture will take the good Christians to heaven, and it's all going to be over, and everyone ends up where they're supposed to be. And it's not going to be like that. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be bad. It's going to be terrifying. It's going to leave everybody, living person, with PTSD, various mental issues, and it's going to leave a whole generation of children with PTSD, lifelong mental issues. But that doesn't stop it from happening. That's what I got for you. Watch what happens with the economy. They may not go through with this. They may say, yeah, let's not cross that threshold, but they might. They might. So what the hell? What are we supposed to do about it? Yeah, I would give it some serious thought. What's it going to look like if you don't drive and you don't fly and there's no food in your stores and you don't know how to get food and there's no movement of money? Your bank account is frozen because Trump wants your money, and you don't have a job anymore because all those other things happen. Now you don't have a job, and what's your world going to look like? What's your world going to look like? And you don't want to think about that. Think about that. Now is the time. Our Titanic has hit the iceberg. And now is not a good time to go get drunk at the bar and wait for someone to fix the problem. Now is the time to start thinking about, okay, iceberg, ship sinking, deck tilting, water coming in. It's a good time to think about lifeboats floating away, rescue, getting my favorite people into the boat with me, and how I'm going to do that, and food, and blankets, and a lifeboat. Start thinking about it. You don't have to do it. You can watch the sinking of the ship and see if they stop the ship sinking. Maybe they will. You don't have to do the lifeboat thing, but you got to start thinking about it. Lifeboat. Where are the lifeboats? What do those even look like? Have you seen any lifeboats on this ship? Is that a lifeboat? Okay, that's a lifeboat. What? It's supposed to be in the water. How do we get food, water, blankets, signal flares? What else do we need? Lifeboat. You can stand there and think about it. You can start thinking about that lifeboat. Dang. Not wanting it, just aware that there's this point. You cross a point where you're like, maybe yes. Maybe yes. So I have to start thinking about not being here, being somewhere else, being situated differently. What does that look like? On a sinking ship, that sounds like, I'm looking for a word, lifeboat, I think is the word. And you should be at that level right now. Trade wars, tariff wars, rickety economy, war in Europe, war in the Indo-Pacific, nuclear weapons are being threatened every single day. You should be thinking about, yeah, getting off. The word I'm looking for is lifeboat. Getting my people in a lifeboat. Do I have one? What does it look like? Where do I get one? How am I going to do that? With whom? How are we going to agree to do that together? Is there going to be a big fight? What if people don't want to get in a lifeboat? Do I have any responsibilities there? Do I have to convince them now or at the time? Maybe it'll make more sense then, but maybe I should be talking about it now. Lifeboats. Hadn't planned on that. That wasn't on my bingo card of life. My life bingo card didn't contain abandoning modernity, but here I am. So, what to do? What to do? get on with it. That's your assignment. Get on with it. I'll keep coming back here and telling you what it is you have to get on with. That's my job. But you, you have to get on with it. What can I say? It's a coming. It's a coming. It solves my problem, global heating. We're not going to be heating the planet anymore if we're not driving and flying and moving goods. Then that problem solved. Yay! I'll take the W. But then lifeboats. Yeah, that's yeah. Start thinking about it. Takes a long time to wrap your head around that. Just start thinking about that. Lifeboats. Giving up, floating away. Lifeboats.